meeting your brother
Yeah.
when I was in Miami,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we were in the cab, and it was me, you, I think Sahel, your brother, and we were heading to Safedin's dinner,
Yeah.
and
That
that
was
and the
really fun.
driver was just like, he had some opposing view to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Forgot what, or no, it wasn't Bitcoin. It was like maybe our because we are a younger generation, our perspective with, was it capitalism? I can't remember our conversation. And you and your brother, anyways, you and your brother, we got to the dinner, and uh, okay, someone's peeking their head in here, but you guys stuck around and were talking to the cab driver for like an extra 10 minutes,
Yeah. That sounds right. I
and
remember this like a
yeah,
little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I think you were just trying to relay your perspective of, and the two of you and him were disagreeing on some, um, I think, socioeconomic topic. And I just thought it was hilarious because we were waiting in line for Safety Dean's dinner, and I could still see you guys like talking to the cab driver.
Yeah. There's a proselytizing streak that my brother and I have where we
Yeah.
like always want to, we talk about it with my dad a little bit that we're like constantly trying to achieve mind meld with him. There's
Mm,
like this, I think we've given up, but definitely I like ideas. My brother likes ideas. He has this sort of like trolly playful air about him. And we like to,
mm.
uh, definitely like to engage with people about it. And it's like taxi conversations with people who are driving you around for like a short period of time or this like fun, compressed,
Yeah.
uh, exchange. I really like it. But yeah, I remember that. That was fun.
He seems like your brother just seems like a funny dude. Playful, just playful at heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For sure.
well, I'm excited to have you on, man. It's, as I was discussing before, we hopped on the mic, was talking to a friend, a Bitcoiner friend at work yesterday, and he was saying how, it's been since episode 6 since you've had anybody on the podcast and talked about Bitcoin. And this conversation could lead to Bitcoin, but it may not. It could go anywhere. Um,
Tom would be disappointed. But
Tom,
yeah.
yeah, Tom. Shout out to Tom. He was on the episode, or the podcast episode 2, and we talked about the history of money and his video that he created, the fundamentals of Bitcoin and just money. And yeah, so it's been a while. It's been a minute. I've had a lot of Squatch members on, maybe like health and fitness um, guests on. And recently, at least on my Instagram, I posted, I said to myself, I would like to reintroduce and get Bitcoin back into the swing of the podcast, and no better way to have you on because I consider you a friend, but it's really cool to have you uh, as a friend and a colleague and also a member at Squatch. It's a cool little mix, and we have some awesome conversations with the people here, and we, um, you know, uh, per the ritual, it's like we run into people in the sauna and have great conversations about whatever. It could be like this one was so different than any other I've had. It was like HR and compliance and
Yeah, it was fun.
regulatory, and our human nature is so like it's just contradicting to the way that you have to communicate with someone in a work environment, in a business environment. And so anyways, I wanted to get to know you better, via just having you tell your story wherever you want to begin. I know that you went to Harvard and you studied English,
Yeah.
but then that's obviously changed.
Yeah.
So wherever you want to begin, and just kind of, we can, it can swing in different ways, but would love to hear about your background and what led you to Austin eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's such a pleasure to be here. This is really fun for
Yeah.
me. Um, yeah, I'm not sure where I'd start with my story, but I'm from Washington D.C. I went to Harvard. I was an English major, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
I think for a large portion of my life was very focused on yeah, on literature and on art, and had sort of a shift, I'd say, in the sort of like latter half of my life after graduating college, if that's That's pretty accurate. That's kind of frightening and strange.
Hmm.
Um, where I've become increasingly interested in like technology and politics and economics and broader systems. And I think that that turn started a little bit in college as as an English major. I felt, I mean, I have a lot of criticisms of education as it exists, and one of them when I was uh, first orienting towards liberal arts education and literature was because these books seemed like these treasure troves of valuable information. They really spoke to how we should live. And increasingly, as I spent time in that educational space, I felt like that wasn't the way we were approaching
Mm.
great works. You'd read a book that could potentially tell you a lot about how to live a moral life or a good life or what the human experience is. But your mandate as a student was A, to read it along with, 10 other books very quickly in a very short period of time.
Mm.
And then B, to approach it for something novel, which was almost inherently after a certain point, something very narrow and specific. So you'd read, I remember reading Thomas Mann Buddenbrooks, which is a fascinating book, and writing, a 10-page paper about the theme of teeth in Buddenbrooks, like, how like, yeah, how teeth, how dental pain, et cetera, like tied into these underlying
Yeah.
themes. And, you can do it. It's a rich book. The author probably thought about motifs, but you're really just, you're focusing a microscope on some corner of this experience that is not central unless you do a really excellent job and you picked your obscure point expertly,
Hmm.
is not central to what the book is about, really. It's sort of tangential. And I think I got the impression, and from people I talked to, that as you get higher up in these areas of academia, the pressure for novelty to sort of like raise your hand in the global discourse that is discussion of Thomas Mann's writing, let's say, or writing about Shakespeare or sonnets or something like that. The pressure is constantly towards a degree of novelty that removes you from like the core meaning
Hmm.
of the work. And I found that sort of increasingly distasteful, or at least not what I wanted to do. And then also felt that, uh, oh, geez, what was I gonna? Felt that there's a degree of subjectivity to that work that also was frustrating. That
Hmm.
you, I mean, I say this not as a person who's like gone into a grad program. I wasn't like an expert in English, but this was the direction that it felt like things were moving. Is that I also studied film and did a fair amount of writing in that space, and eventually you reach a point where you realize you could have made the exact same, like the opposite argument from the argument that you made, and it would have been equally valid
Mm.
in a context. And I started to find that very unsettling. And so I sought things that were more um,
There's a theory. I
objective.
think there's
Yeah,
a
for sure.
sorry to interrupt, but there's
Yeah.
like a principle that I follow Gurwinder on Substack, and he has all these. Every so often, he introduces principles or mental models, and one was how, as a human being, you can rationalize anything. So be
Hmm.
careful of like you can rationalize something that's completely idiotic, and that came to mind once you brought up the fact that it's kind of unsettling to realize that someone can maybe dupe themselves in regards to like a
Yeah.
debating environment or learning environment.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary that you can rationalize anything, but you can't rationalize anything. I mean, that's one of the beauties of engineering. It's like you cannot rationalize a false theory of aerodynamics
Mm,
and have it work. You try to fly that plane and it like drops like a
right.
stone. There is a actual reality out there. So there's some debate about that. And you when you're dealing with the real world, you have to conform to it and keep close to reality.
Hmm.
And I started after a period of time to find that sort of like a very appealing direction to go down. That wasn't direct. After I graduated, I spent some time abroad
Hmm.
to continue the story. I lived in China for about a year. Worked in sort of a college counseling education space that was very strange and fun and interesting and morally compromising.
Why was it strange morally
Well,
compromising?
so the college counseling in, I'm speaking, this is like 12 years in the past, 10 years in the past, something like
Okay.
that. But at the time, and I think it's probably not too dissimilar, um, my understanding of the Chinese educational process was it's very strict and meritocratic. And basically, if you Did very well in a excellent public high school, you'd get into an excellent public college, and if you did very well in this excellent public college, you go into an excellent public grad program, and then eventually rise into the ranks of bureaucracy and
Mm,
do well for yourself in life. And if at any point along that process you didn't do so well, sort of like taking the GMAT or something, your whole spectrum of options is somewhat clipped, unless you're from a reasonably wealthy family or family with means, in which case many families would sort of reorient their child. And this is in a single what was one child policy environment
mm,
where often a child is the focal point of not just their two parents, but like four additional grandparents. There's a lot of pressure, and they will, if they have money, will sort of reorient their child towards the Western or English speaking
mm,
education environment and try to get their kid into like a name brand school in the US. And so they'd send them to a program such as my own, which was basically like a series of college counseling institutions attached to English speaking educational like schools across China
mhm,
that would help those kids apply to college, write their essays, get their teacher recommendations, etc. And that industry ranged from like reasonably morally upstanding, which was my company, in which case, I would be asked to rewrite someone's essay or like help them edit it, but like help them edit it maybe 10 times, 15 times until
mm,
it was basically my essay and I was applying to school. And some other places would literally write students' essays for them, fake teacher recommendations, fake their transcripts, send someone to take the TOEFL for them. And it was just this vast morally gray space that American colleges were aware of but put up with because there are very few schools in the U.S. that give need blind financial aid to foreign students. So
mm,
basically, these students were a guaranteed source of income, unlike, say, in-state students or other students who accepted financial aid in the U.S.
mhm,
It's basically, I think, like 5 schools in the U.S. give need blind financial aid to foreign students. It's like Princeton, Yale, et cetera.
yeah,
And as a consequence, these kids are like guaranteed cash cows. Also, because many of them, if their transcripts, et cetera, were significantly faked, they wouldn't speak good English, and they'd have to go into remedial programs the second they landed in the U.S., which are highly costly.
mm,
And so there was this weird trade-off um, exchange between American colleges that sort of knew they were getting students that were often faked or they weren't putting in the effort to sort through them, but were willing to do so because it was one of their chief sources of
mm,
income. And on the other hand, these families in China that knew they were sending their kids to schools where they might feel socially isolated, not know the language, be in a vastly different culture, but they were getting the sort of like name brand recognition that was important when they returned to China. So it was this strange symbiotic relationship that for me felt very strange also because as a component of this system, I was sort of the first layer of admissions gatekeeping. Like if I worked with a student and I really liked them and I thought they were great, I would just do a better job with them. Their
mm,
their essay would be better, or I would like give them better advice. Some of that, somewhat purposefully, but I think it just happened naturally over time.
yeah,
You're working with students, and I trust my own judgment, but that's a very strange position to be in, and the whole thing was weird.
yeah, and that's something that comes to mind, based off of your relationship with that student. I mean, it's natural to be more incentivized internally to help someone that you gravitate towards more, just their personality and who they are and their character. And so if there's a student that's just being a royal pain in the ass and you're
Yeah,
trying your hardest, it's still your the fabric of your mind is still it's difficult to, you know, more optimally help them with their process of creating the essay or whatever they're doing.
yeah,
So, I mean, yeah, you're, the moral hazard, I can totally see why you're thinking in that way because you're putting pressure on yourself to try to, no matter what, put in as much effort as possible with every single student that comes by, but it might be just more naturally easier for certain students.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was. I had individual people in mind as you were mentioning there. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like
Yeah.
2 students who I thought were really 3 maybe who I thought were really excellent. One who was the annoying kid. Um, you know, and then all sorts of in betweens. But yeah,
Yeah.
It was a strange, fascinating experience. China is an incredibly fun place to be when you're
Mm.
like 22. I was living in Shanghai mostly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've never been. Well, actually, I touched down in China on my way to Thailand, and I'm trying
Cool.
to remember where it was. Guangzhou, China. Anyways, what made it so fun? Just as an American, or is it?
Yeah,
Uh,
it felt like a playground. There was a term, I don't know if it's still used, so Lao Wai, which is like basically foreigner, and then people would talk about the Lao Wai drunk tank, which is basically in the major cities of China. If you get really drunk and you're this never happened to me, guys. I'm upstanding.
okay.
Uh, but if you get really drunk or you're a mess, in the sort of way you'd be like you're you'd be in trouble, and if you were like a Chinese person, you might get in serious trouble. Uh, there was the famed, I don't know if this was a literal place. I think it was, you'd be thrown in the Lao Wai drunk tank, which is they just like put you in a nice padded cell, you chill out overnight, and then they let you go. There are no serious consequences for behavior.
Mm,
In China, or sorry, in Shanghai, there's a expat community when I was there, because the city was like, 20 million people. There's an expat community that was as large as the population of San Francisco, pretty much.
mm,
And they tend to live in a pretty small area called the French Concession, which is gorgeous. And basically, you can just go out and drink all the time. Everything's cheap. Everything's sort of like bustling and crazy, and you just have a lot of fun. And there are very few consequences. And also, you're a foreigner in this like distinct and irrevocable way, where people really treat you very differently as a white person in China. It's both good and bad, but it was very funny. People would like come up to me and just, I had a beard at the time too, which it's basically been like 12 years ago. And now
mhm.
there was a very long beard that my mom hated in the interim, but for the most part, I haven't had a beard. But people would come up and rub my beard just like without asking.
Without asking.
Um, yeah,
Wow.
which was funny. And you're given a lot of leeway. Like I spoke pretty crappy Mandarin. I could say like hi and bye and thank you and order bus tickets, but not really have a conversation. I traveled with my boss at the time, who's Korean, Japanese, American, and spoke pretty good Mandarin, but looked Asian. And so when we'd travel, uh, I'd say like ni hao, and people would like basically clap, and she'd say something really nice, and they would literally tell her you need to speak better. And there's this very funny, uh, unfair, bizarre dynamic to it. At the same time, on the flip side, you were like never, ever, ever going to be Chinese. So I had a good friend there who was, to my ears, which are probably wrong, like functionally fluent. He's like a white Jewish kid from Baltimore who'd spent a bunch of time there and spoke incredible Mandarin. He could switch accents. He was very good at it. He'd
Mm,
lived there for a while, and he just his experience was he was never local. He was never part of the community. It's countries differ in this regard, and he later moved to India where he didn't he spoke English, but he didn't speak, I guess, like Hindi or Urdu, and immediately felt like a much more integrated part of that society.
mm,
Um, it's tough in China, but you're always this sort of outsider in this fun,
mhm.
interesting way.
Cool.
Maybe sometimes not fun, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay. And so after that time in China, did you go to the Bay Area, San Francisco, or?
Yeah, I was planning on maybe going to New York or something. I'm from DC, right? So I
Mhm.
was like oriented towards the East Coast, but my brother lived in San Francisco, and I went to visit him, and I slept on his couch for a week, and then it extended to basically a year and a half on his couch.
Okay.
Uh, he's more extroverted than I am, and so he didn't like he likes having people around and all the time. And I like would try to grow up and leave for a period of time, but
Yeah.
we sort of stuck together. And
Nice.
I got there and I got into tech slowly in this sort of like classic. I just tripped into it. I took the LSAT
What
and
year
was
what year was this? Sorry to interrupt.
2011, 2012. I
Okay.
graduated school in
'Cause there's a
2011
drastic difference of the quality of living, I think.
in Shanghai, and
Well, I'm talking about San Francisco.
yeah,
In
I think
comparison
so.
to today, it seems like the Bay Area and San Francisco was praised, one, for being Silicon Valley, and it was erupting around that time, I believe, 2010, 2011, or maybe before. And then now it's not, it's declining ever since COVID,
Yeah.
but you
Uh,
might know much better than I.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on your vantage point. So I'm not very into San Francisco right now. I wouldn't want to live there. I think part of that is San Francisco, and a very large part of that is me.
Mhm.
So I was more aligned with its overriding ethos when I moved there in around 2012
What was
uh,
that?
than I am now.
The
Well,
the ethos?
it's got a couple different. I mean, that's what makes it an interesting place. It has a couple different ethoses. So I think the Silicon Valley thing, which is older. It goes back at least into the early thousands, and probably like in the
Mm,
90s.
okay.
Used to be a sort of more libertarian ethos, as I understood it. And I've talked to people who were there a little bit before I arrived, who thought of it as like, you'd go to these really cool, these like libertarian parties with Balaji Srinivasan. I heard this really funny story about from someone who went to a party. It just sounds like a perfect description of him if you're
Mhm.
familiar with the guy.
Yeah.
That basically, whenever you'd go to a party with him, inevitably it's like 3 in the morning, everyone else has left, and there's like a group of 15 coder bros just like surrounding Balaji and rapt attention as he's talking about. So
Yeah.
hopefully it's not a bullshit story. But I heard that from a friend. And those populations, there's also sort of the Burning Man contingent, which is more exploratory. People have accused it of being libertarian. I don't really think it's like particularly ideological. It's though there is this sort of personal responsibility bent that I associate very strongly with the Burning Man ethos,
Mm.
having been there a couple times. Then there's like this classic, like Jack Kerouac, 60s onward, like um, hippie leftist contingent in San Francisco. And I think what people feel over time is that um, the city became increasingly taken over by like a less culturally rich or diverse or creative um, cohort of people associated with big tech, as big tech sort of started to be fed more from, you know, less ideological people from more mainstream universities. And over time, it developed this like dominant, consistent ideology that's uh, progressive, and what friends used to refer to as fake nice, which I didn't really get, but because I thought
Is a
people were nice there. Yeah.
is a, quote that I've heard, people in or on the West, within the United States are fake nice, but deep down, they're assholes, right? Their intentions are
Yeah.
maybe not there, are not true when they're speaking to you. Whereas people in the East,
Uh-huh.
they're assholes to you, but they're telling it's kinda like Boston or New York. At least I'm from Massachusetts, like, people can be seen as rough around the edges, but they're being truthful with you, and, like, that's a quote I've heard. I don't know, it's not I'm maybe not depicting exactly the way it was said, but it's like, essentially, deep down, your intuition or not your intuition, like, your intentions are truthful on the East, but you can be rough around the edges and just
Hmm.
kinda like, the classic Boston, um, and then, yeah, on the West, people will just be, yeah, fake nice to you, but deep down, they they don't mean what they say. So it's like almost like this inverse,
Yeah.
scenario of cultures on the East and the West.
I think that's largely right. I mean, I went back to my 5th year reunion to Boston from San Francisco, and I was so the first thing when I moved to San Francisco, I moved there from China. I didn't move there from the East
Mm,
Coast. I hadn't So it was harder for me to make this
like,
comparison
the
because China and
contrast.
San Francisco are just like wildly different,
Yeah.
and Boston and San Francisco are much more similar.
Uh,
But when I went back to Boston, I was struck again. Like when you're on the metro or you're just in public spaces, it feels kind of colder. Like people aren't, there isn't as much public interaction. There isn't as much like chatting,
mm,
let's say, in my memory between people at a coffee shop. I find Austin to be like very friendly
yeah,
in
yeah,
that regard. Cool place.
yeah.
Um, but
Weather's great.
yeah, the difference for me was it's sort of like an unwillingness to make people uncomfortable is what characterizes.
Mm,
I'm gonna move this. Is what characterizes San Francisco for
yeah,
me, or
yeah,
that ethos.
yeah.
So there's a lot of calculating to try to like pre-imagine what a person feels or doesn't feel and what would make them uncomfortable,
Mhm,
and to assiduously avoid it. Whereas in New York, even more than Boston, in my mind, I associate like this like willingness to confront. And over time, what that means is that what comes across what is meant to come across in that sort of environment of greater conformity and consistency as friendliness is often just conflict avoidance and like play acting.
Mm,
And over time, you can get like conformist trends that feel like, frankly, quite scary and strange to me. And as I became less sort of like politically in accordance with the overarching ideology of San Francisco, it became very clear to me how stultified I felt, like how difficult it was for me to like openly speak my mind and have what felt to me to be like an interesting conversation, and how many people around me um, were, I think, essentially like censoring their thought processes without realizing it.
mm,
And I had a couple. I mean, I've had some conversations with friends where I was, talking about things that I thought were crazy about, like the sort of mandatory ideology of San Francisco. And they would say things like, yeah, 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 of course, Sasha, like everyone agrees with you. Like, this is crazy.
mhm.
And then the follow-up question I think ought to be, well, like if everyone agrees with me, why is nobody saying it? Like no one says, and they don't agree with me on everything. I'm an extremist and a weirdo. But on the things that most people agreed with me about, like why is there such silence? Why is there this conformity? And it started to feel really, really quite suffocating near the end of my time, and particularly in COVID, which is around when I left.
Mm,
Um, and when I left, and I went to Mexico for a bit, and then I came here, I just can't imagine returning to that. It feels so natural to me to be more expressive about my thought process and to spend less of my mental cycles calculating how someone is going to react to
mm,
something I say if I
yeah.
believe it. And I think you sort of forget that over a period of time there. But for me, like when I moved there, there were more of the sort of like political or ideological um or philosophical standpoints that are normative for San Francisco that I agreed with than around the time I left. So part of it is certainly the place changing, part of it is me. And then of course there's the stuff that, like shows up on Twitter, et cetera, which is like I think San Francisco was one of the first cities and now what is like becoming just a multi-city trend across the US of with like sharply spiking homelessness rates, allowance of petty crime, like a general increasing like dirtiness on the streets in a sense that, my brother has a 2.5-year-old kid, uh, almost 3 actually,
Mm,
in a few months. And, the way he put it is basically that this city it's not for children. It's not designed in any way to be a comfortable space where you could like imagine your 8-year-old kid could like walk around and explore. Uh, and it felt to me at least, and some people might agree with this, like, man, I wouldn't like if I had an 8-year-old kid, I wouldn't want them wandering around the streets of San
right.
Francisco. Not just because 'cause they'll, like, step on a needle, which was a concern that my mom had when I was a kid
Yeah,
in DC, but,
yeah.
like, it doesn't feel like it feels like it's really kind of falling apart. Um, but it's a beautiful place, it has, like, a real richness to it, the surrounding area is just stunning. There's a lot
It's
to
beautiful
recommend
in
it.
regards to
Yeah.
the geographics and
Yeah.
the location of where it is weather-wise and just, where it is in the United States, and, I try not to be super biased with anything, but, yeah, ever since I've been on Twitter, which really, um, started primarily during COVID because I was getting into Bitcoin. Ever since since 2020 to now, the sentiment that I received regarding San Francisco is San Francisco, which is by
Mhm.
Michael Schellenberger, who
Yeah.
was a journalist, pretty prominent journalist, and now has been maybe circled in with like Barry Weiss and
Taibbi.
Taibbi,
Yeah.
and they're creating their own like independent, which I absolutely commend, and I think it's great because this is a very odd time and very
Mhm.
difficult time for independent journalists to push against the grain, which I would love to pick your brain about as well. Um, but yeah, San Francisco, he was just interviewing tons of homeless people,
Yeah.
and I faintly remember one of the interviews. It was just like, "Where are you coming from?" And it was some other area of the United States, and he was
Mhm.
homeless in that area too, but it was more attractive to come to San Francisco because of
Mhm.
it was as if homelessness was maybe not incentivized, but it was just easier for the homeless to
Right.
condone and maintain their way of who they were. uh,
Yep.
and that's concerning. And
Yeah.
yeah, I always prior to that, I always thought of Full House when it came to San Francisco and how beautiful it
Yeah.
was, and I've never been to California, but so I can't be a critical judge of it, but based off of the uh, multiple different perspectives online, at least I can get a general assessment, and I did that for Austin, and it has proven to
Mhm.
work out, right? And so, anyways, it's nice to hear, from yourself, the sentiment and the actual, experience that you had when you were there.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, it was a weird, it moves very quickly, that city. It changes, like, constantly, and, um, I think, I arrived during a pretty interesting time during, like, one of the waves of sort of counter gentrification protest.
Mhm.
So there was, some crazy shit in, like, 2012, 2011. I guess it was, I think April of 2012 was when I landed there. But there were these protests against the Google buses that included, people who would dress up as Googlers and then, do bad things to try to, like, provoke bad press.
Mm.
Um, and, I remember a couple cases of people who would also, like, climb up on the hoods of these Google buses and, like, force themselves to throw up on the bus.
Man.
And there were decades ago, there were protests against gentrification where people would, like, look for nice cars and slash their tires.
Oh, wow.
And so there's been, and I arrived there and I was aware that, like, on any sort of demographic or at some point once I got into tech, like, professional level, I was kind of like the enemy of these social movements,
Mm.
and, didn't really think I was doing anything wrong.
You didn't work for Google, did you?
No, but I worked in tech.
Yeah.
And, I mean, one of I think there are definitely parts of the argument that I find appealing or sensible, and one of the ways I think you could put it is it's not that, like, someone who works for Google isn't, like, creating a lot of value in the world. They are, at least, like, now they're creating this tool that, like, millions and millions of people use, or, we at Unchained are creating a tool that is of value to people, but the value we're creating, unlike the value of a coffee shop or the value of, like, a gym or something, is non-localized. And, so there's this strange, and also there are these, like, economies of scale that mean that if you work for Google, you're extracting value, or you're creating value for, like, so many people that, you tend to get wealthier than people who are making this localized value.
Mhm.
So over time, what happens is, like, more and more people are coming to the city and pricing out people who live there, who are creating value, but it's, like, elsewhere. And the creation of the fabric of the space,
Like the
is, like,
local
becomes
culture.
harder and harder.
Yeah.
There are fewer and fewer people, and,
Just sad in a way, but at the
yeah.
same time, uh, it's the process of evolution in
Mhm.
regards to, yeah, tech kind of coming to that space. But yeah, like coffee shops and local businesses that provide that spirit to the city, they're
Mhm.
not making as much money maybe, and that's getting pushed out of the way because of what you were just describing.
Yep. Totally.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think those problems, San Francisco is sort of like the cutting edge of it. But I mean, near our office in downtown Austin, I haven't gone in that much because I've been mostly working from home. And over the last, like, 2 or so months, the homelessness scene around, like, Brazos and 6th Street, I don't know if you know, it just keeps getting worse. And I think
yeah.
in DC where I grew up, there are, like, tents in public places that I never saw them as a kid. Um, we're looking at the local manifestations of global or at least national problems. Um, and San Francisco was the edge of it, and I think certain local policies exacerbate the problem. And I haven't read, Schellenberger's book,
I
but I
haven't.
think he advocates for, like, a shelter first as opposed to, like, a housing first solution, which is to say, like, give minimal housing, but don't, uh, essentially, the city of San Francisco is always, like, comical in the extent. There was a time where they spent $40 million, I think I'm getting this right, on a, like, 13-person housing setup in downtown San Francisco for the homeless. And, the sort of it's single person housing, so you end up with these, like, isolated folks. Everyone in the community is pretty much a drug addict. There's no oversight. There are no incentives to get out of it. It's, like, completely covered, and I've talked in San Francisco to at least one particular homeless person regularly, and gotten a strong sense of her. The incentives are real. I mean, we like to think uh, that no one wants to be homeless. Fair, like very few people do, but you can change the incentive structure, the environment in which people live, and it will change in aggregate on the margin how many people are living one way or another.
Mm.
And when you're providing, you know, uh, 40 or maybe it was $13 million for 40 units. At any rate, just like an absurd expenditure. When you're providing housing of that quality in that area for free, for no behavioral changes to people who can freely use that housing for drugs, you're changing the likelihood of people to do that. And yeah, I think Schellenberger also thinks it's primarily or largely a drug issue, and the policies in San Francisco in dealing with the homelessness, epidemic, uh, tended to be allowant or more concerned with drug safety than drug consumption, which these are all, I think, like reasonable conceptually, but I don't think they pan out. So, like safe needle exchanges in public places with essentially no crackdown on public drug use.
Mm.
So you can walk, all over downtown San Francisco, and I believe it's gotten worse. And just like every block of anywhere near like the Capitol building or Union Square, the nice touristy areas, you see people like doing, I guess it's like the Baltimore lean where they're just like tipped over in like a heroin state. And it's just constant everywhere. It's like a ghost town. There are blocks where you're surrounded by, 50 people, and like none of them are mentally present. And there's no uh, interest in or capacity to fix that. The problem is deemed to be the judgment about that or attempts to stop it. And I just don't think I think the problem gets worse when that's the mindset. Um,
How do you think?
yeah.
What's the best way to? It's probably so complex, but how do you foresee us helping um, homelessness and drug use? I mean, eventually, it's like getting rid of drugs potentially, or
Yeah, I mean, I'm reasonably libertarian, so
Mhm.
I have some internal. I don't think prohibition of alcohol was a good idea. I don't think prohibition of cocaine is probably a good idea. I think the costs of prohibition are exceptionally high, even if taking the drug is a terrible idea. I think that's possible that crosses over at a certain point.
I was gonna say, what about like fentanyl?
Yeah, fentanyl sounds sounds pretty bad. Um,
It's like it's not even a sliver of it can
right,
kill you.
and they're drugs that at least conceptually rob you of your autonomy to a great degree.
Mm.
Like if it's a hard question, but if you were to take a drug and it basically, um, how would you put it?
Just numbs you. It just takes away your agency. Your
Just on a like a philosophical level, if you could say like you take fentanyl and it, let's say like you take X drug and it increases to a likelihood of 90% that you'll go crazy and murder someone. Like, should we prohibit this drug? The taking of the drug is not murder. It's not, you're only doing something to yourself,
Mhm.
but it's statistically increasing the likelihood of this danger by a very
Chaos.
significant
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
When does there start to be a right? Or you could think of this in relation to drinking and drunk driving. Drinking is mostly a threat to yourself. You can get in fights, whatever, but it certainly increases the likelihood that you will drive drunk. We don't think that's a good enough reason to, and driving drunk drastically increases the likelihood you'll kill someone. We don't think that's a good enough reason to prohibit it. But if you like slid those percentage likelihoods up, there's a point at which we do. Um, I also think one thing like the sort of status quo involved in I've no idea what the hell I'm talking about when it comes to like how to solve these problems. I really do want to read Michael
Yep.
Schellenberger's book,
Yeah.
but I haven't gotten to it. I think he's a very thoughtful, reasonable person, and he's very embedded in these issues, and he's thought about them a lot, and
Mhm.
he's interviewed a lot of people. Um, I I tend to find him compelling, and he's also very non-ideological. He's like a liberal-ish person who's, finds himself like awash in the modern political movement.
Mm.
But yeah, I would also say that the status quo of sort of ignoring or allowing deleterious drug use on the streets of a city is so very negative that arresting someone who's doing fentanyl and throwing them in a jail where they have no access to it, where they have like okay shelter, where they have regular access to food is probably better for them than leaving them on the street. That makes me somewhat uncomfortable. I don't like the idea um of like a state or any institution having a right to just like take you for something that you do to yourself and put you in a cage. That makes me very uncomfortable. But I think um, part of it is this question of allegiances to bring it back to like my brother's deal about kids. It's like, who is the city for? Like, what is our polity about? Like, who is the citizenry? What matters here? Um, and I think the citizenry, like the sorts of polities I want to be a part of are ones in which like peaceful, productive. I feel like that's a sort of loaded term, but people who are like trying to work for others, trying to voluntarily and peaceably exchange for others, who are not like risks to others. Those are the people who the polity is for. And if in some hypothetical you have people who are making it more difficult for those people to like raise families that are, in a way that they feel are like safe and happy and healthy, um, we have to prioritize one group over another. I don't, I, yeah,
Yeah,
I wouldn't say I have a solution to
it's
anything.
so complex because yeah, I do resonate as a being within the Bitcoin culture and um libertarian mindset. I've definitely leaned towards that. I actually voted for the libertarian candidate when it was Trump and Biden last.
Gary?
Yeah, was it
Oh,
Gary or was
Trump
it
and,
it was
Jill, no,
s- s-
Jill Stein was the Green Party in
now I'm trying to
2016.
remember her name.
Yeah, yeah, I know who you're, Joe Jorgensen.
Joe Jorgensen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I voted for her. My father also is pretty libertarian as well, and I'm all for free markets and um yeah, but at the same time, what everything that you just eloquently described, if you have people that are creating and contributing to humanity in a way that's, as you said, peaceful is kind of like a vague term, but if they're harmoniously providing a energy or contribution or creation towards making the ecosystem more livable and towards yeah, making it, I mean, I guess I don't know if secure is the correct word, but uh yeah, you want that to thrive, right? And at the same time there's uh something that I've heard from other podcasts. It's like pain is information, and over time if you're overly comfortable, you tend to become weaker, and that's the whole weak men or good times creates weak men and bad times create strong men, and we're at that point where it might be weak men right now in society. And uh yeah, there's just I think that issue is so complex.
Yeah, I mean, there's just that. I think the pain thing is interesting to me that there's, I believe it's multiple sclerosis. Sorry if I'm wrong, but that's where essentially like your nerve endings become less capable, at least in certain parts of your body, detecting pain. So you could like leave your hand on something that would burn you without realizing it.
Mm,
And we experience pain because pain is feedback. And a lot of the policies, certainly policies related to homelessness, have to do with like pain reduction and trying to sort of like smooth off the
mm,
edges of an experience, which is to try to decrease the natural feedback of what happens if you make decisions that undermine your ability to just
mm,
like support yourself and behave peaceably with those around you. And that decision, the decision to act in a way that makes it more difficult for you to support yourself and behave peaceably with people around you produces costs. And there's a question of like where those costs are allocated then in the society. And if the society makes decisions to try to like soften that blow, it's absorbing those costs increasingly, and it's creating incentives. Um, I, I, I know people don't like the incentives thing, but it's increasing the likelihood on the margins that people will behave in that way.
Mm.
The margins being, um, someone who's like maybe considering trying fentanyl or some drug that's, ends up being laced with fentanyl, and their models for the risks associated with that are less extremely horrifying than they maybe ought to be.
Mm.
Um, and I think you can sort of relate this um, to sort of broader health discussions a little bit. I don't want to get too far afield, but I feel like when you talk about we tend to have a focus when we talk about health in broader society about like healthcare systems or health insurance, et cetera. And these are essentially like mitigating and spreading costs. And when you mitigate and spread the costs of an individual's behavior, and I know that's also a thing that people find offensive or uncomfortable, but like a very, very large, probably majority of health issues have at least a significant behavioral component
Mhm.
associated with them. And uh, one of the things that happens when you take the costs that accrue from eating a particular way or not getting enough sleep or like not wanting to exercise, et cetera, and you spread them further away from the individual making the decision, is that you increase the amount of. I think we talked about this last time we were at Jester King a little bit.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
we did.
you increase the total amount of those sorts of decisions being made, again, at the margin a little bit. No one wants to be unhealthy,
Mm.
but you'd rather be unhealthy than be, like, unhealthy and poorer,
Mm.
right? And so there's a very tight, careful balance to be weighed when having these discussions to make sure we're not generating systems that produce the sort of thing we're trying to protect against when we're trying to make that thing more, livable,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, well said. Um, there's, the Austin Alliance here in,
Hmm.
downtown Austin. They are all wearing red shirts.
Ah, yeah, 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 I've seen those
Yeah,
guys.
I don't know if that's something that's typical for cities,
Mm,
where my guess is property taxes here in Texas are those taxes are being allocated to the Austin Alliance, and that's something that I approve of, and I have, uh I got here in September of 2021, and when I got here, was it Prop A or Prop B that was a decision, a policy to, ban homeless camping within the city, and I think
mhm,
it passed, or the ultimate, outcome was that homeless can't, reside via their tents and their camping in the city, and prior to that, there was a lot of, that was acceptable, and it was interesting because as I got here in September of 2021, I was watching, um, all these different locations, within a 10-minute radius of downtown Austin, all the camping went away, and it was going
mhm,
away, and I think there was actual enforcement to ship them, and I think
mhm.
Governor Abbott has actually taken them, or at least this is maybe for the border, but, he ships them out to, like, DC or sanctuary cities and whatnot.
Yep.
Um, and so, yeah, homeless has been I've seen they camp out in the woods now, go disc golfing, and they're in the woods somewhere in the course and
Mm,
or, like, certain parts of, anyways, it's a huge issue, obviously, and something that's so complex that I don't think one human person or program or company or whatever could fix. It's just something that we, though,
mhm,
as, members of Unchained, previously Unchained Capital, like, I remember Phil actually tweeting this, during the Prob A, or I think it's Prob B, and Parker was really for this as well, Parker Lewis, who used to work for Unchained. He's an advisor now, but he was very, outspoken about this, homeless camping, policy.
mhm,
But then Phil tweeted about it, and just to kind of show his support and saying how, like, currently we're focused on the root of the issue, or which is Bitcoin in our money system.
mhm,
And, um, for now, voting in this way can help with providing a more he didn't I'm totally paraphrasing, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but it was essentially like, we're working on the root of the problem, homelessness being the problem, maybe, other, degrading aspects of society. We're working on that, but right now it's not as livable when you have this, when you allow this. Um, and so all that's to say, I'm trying to think of where we were in your personal story. You were in San Francisco, and so now
Here now.
you're here now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I moved to
uh,
Mexico for a bit, but yeah,
yeah. How was that?
that's dope.
Yeah,
Yeah, Mexico City is one of the great cities,
yeah,
and I went there in early mid COVID. I was trying to, um, I think that San Francisco really like became pretty unlivable,
yeah,
in terms of just like that you're paying more than you're paying for
yeah, yeah,
housing in
yeah,
Austin,
yeah,
and everything's boarded up, and you can't go outside without a mask without getting yelled at, which happened to me very often. And
yeah. It
I
happened to me in
really didn't like
Boston.
it. Yeah,
I was like walking down Cambridge. I lived really close to Cambridge Common,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
that's right next to Harvard
I
Square and
remember that feeling a little bit like a drug scene at some point.
Cambridge Common.
Yeah, no,
Not when I was there, not too much.
okay.
Uh, but yeah, I was just like, I was going for a jog.
Mhm.
I didn't have my mask on.
Yeah.
Guy was on his bike and he yells at me. It's like, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. I just think it's yeah, the really awful thing about the whole deal for me was that, like, as I mentioned, I'm like a proselytizer. I wanna, like, convince people of I hold opinions strongly, loosely but strongly, like, I'm really into it. Uh, and I would wanna talk to people about, like, why I think this isn't these masks, there's just no evidence for them. The sort of studies that are being used as evidence are modeling, so they start with the assumptions that they work, and then they say, "Hey, if they work, they work."
There
Um,
was also like potentially the virus could stay in the mask and like you
sure.
could absorb the virus even more.
Or just other health effects when you sort of, like, change
Yeah.
the mix of gases that you're taking in regularly. Um, and, there were attempts at, you know, placebo-controlled, like, meaningful trials. Those attempts were, like, utterly underwhelming. There was a Danish one and a Bangladeshi one that just didn't really show any efficacy, and at any rate came out, like, a year and a half after these things were mandated, even though they were never recommended for flu viruses, and, like, there are a lot of
Yeah.
arguments you could
Yeah.
make, and the thing is you can't, because like, you can't even get close to the person. You're not really supposed to be speaking outdoors. They think you're the virus, you're the enemy. And it was so perfectly designed to be like irresolvable through discourse. We can't all go to the local watering hole and like talk it out. We go to our little silos in the internet, um, where we get like perfectly um, exclusive views of the world. For the Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, had this
Mm,
old image during 2016 of basically like the left and the right were just watching two different movies,
yeah.
uh, like two different edits of the same world. And certainly, I don't know exactly what the sides were during COVID, but that was the case. And then like all your ability to reconcile those two different
Yeah.
views is taken away from you by the very thing you're arguing about. It was bad.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I tried to get the hell out. My brother had just had, my nephew in Mexico City. My brother's wife had just had my nephew in
Yeah.
Mexico
Yeah.
City,
Yeah.
and I went to visit them, and I quit my job. I started freelancing, and like wanted to just like live a normalish existence,
Mm-hmm.
and spent about a half a year there, and just had the best time. It's such a wonderful place. It's
Nice.
like green and walkable. It has perfect weather, excellent food, hip as shit, like really just diverse and massive.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of like the hipster core of the city, which is whenever anyone visits Mexico City, they're in like Condesa or Roma or wherever. But outside of that, there's just like more and more and more. And the country itself is just like very friendly place. Wonder I think Mexican Spanish is just like super fun,
Mm,
and great beaches, very geographically diverse and culturally diverse and rich and just cool. Great place.
yeah.
Had an awesome time.
It's awesome. And so after Mexico, you went to Austin?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Joined the company when I was in Mexico, and then moved here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, there's so many different threads I would like to go down. One is like your article also Unchained and Bitcoin. I think we could start with just describing Unchained. And a question that came up was it came up when you were talking about Google
Mhm.
and tech in Silicon Valley within the Bay Area back in the 2000s, early 2000s, and how Austin's, it seems to me that it's becoming a Bitcoin hub for
Mhm.
developers, entrepreneurs, thinkers, and Unchained is providing a really amazing, well, they're helping uh, sponsor for the Bitcoin Commons, and where we can kind of have like an open, actual in real life open square for people to host events, and it's been really I've been really grateful to witness it, and I've been kind of busy with the podcast, so I haven't gone to as many events as I used to over the course of the past 6 months. But anyways, Austin does have this interesting mix of what the city
Mhm.
is, and like the fact, what attracted me was Bitcoin, right? It was the foundation of my motivation was well, how am I gonna get paid? This is coming from like a um hierarchy of needs mindset here, but like, yeah, how am I gonna get paid if I'm gonna move there? But also is it Austin has this unique pocket, or multiple unique pockets of demographics of when it comes to like comedy and music and Bitcoin enthusiasts that have this freedom, digital freedom mindset and vision. And then you come to Squatch, and I don't meet many Bitcoiners here. There's some, but like you can talk to them, and it
Mhm.
was it was very, very apparent. I'm so like, I've been so immersed into this bubble of Squatch, right? But coming from like Boston and
Mhm.
coming to here, and then talking to people in the sauna, and it was it was just a fresh breath of air and a sigh of relief of like,
Yeah.
when I was in Cambridge, you could just feel um the inability. It's kind of like what you were
Mhm.
describing about like people just don't want to talk about um they censor themselves, right? And
It's the worst.
yeah,
It's
and
just
that was just
so
so,
unpleasant.
it was very unpleasant in Boston. I'd walk around Boston, and it was just like depressing during COVID.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, still to this day, Massachusetts is a little bit behind when it comes to moving on from COVID in comparison to like Texas.
Mhm.
Um, and so kind of rambling, but coming here, the foundation was Bitcoin, and now I'm just so happy with the diversity of different, just my lifestyle here in Austin.
Mhm.
It's been great.
Yeah, same. I mean,
And
that's why I came here for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
And Squatch, I'm beginning to get into like salsa and two-step dancing and trying to
mm,
like build the thing around that because
yeah,
it's just really fun.
yeah.
And there's a whole community. I mean, the two-step scene in Austin and generally like the country music, what are they called? Uh Honky tonk. The
Yeah,
honky tonk
yeah,
scene
yeah,
is like it's great. It's
yeah.
really fun. And the lake in quotes, which is like a river. I really don't understand the bodies of
It's
water.
like Lady Bird Lake, but it
Yeah.
seems like it's a river when you look at it from like an aerial view.
Yeah.
It's like separating the city of Austin,
Yeah.
and then like South Congress and other parts of South Austin. But yeah, it's a lake, but it looks like a river, and I don't know. But
Yeah, it's a cool place, and the heat is wonderful.
yeah,
It's just
I
the
enjoy
best.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents are like, they look at it and they're like, that's nuts. It's 100
Yeah.
degrees like every day for 2 months. But I've gotten acclimated to it.
Yeah.
And even though I'm from New England, I don't think I'm built for the cold.
Mm.
I just would have like, maybe this is a sign of health too, just the status of my current levels of health metrics. But at the time, when I was, yeah, when I was in Massachusetts in the cold, it was like poor circulation in my hands and my
Mhm.
feet, and it was just like, did not feel like I was built for the cold climate. But I like I'd like to oh yeah, so go back to Google versus like Unchained. Obviously, it's drastically different. And
Unchained is the Google of, I have no
no,
idea.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, we Unchained definitely has maybe a vision of being like the Goldman Sachs of Bitcoin, right?
Mhm.
I don't know how Goldman Sachs is perceived nowadays, but maybe when Goldman Sachs had a reputable, like,
Mhm.
you know, big banks are not really looked upon with a,
Mhm.
uh, the like approval nowadays, big
Mhm.
banks in general. But at a time, I think maybe they were. Anyways,
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah,
I think people haven't liked banking for a very long time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyways,
They've needed it. It's, like, important, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. We don't really have to. We can kind of like sideswipe Google here, but how has your experience with Unchained been? And then also, what motivated you to join the company? And what do you maybe to a layman, like, or in layman's terms, what Unchained is doing? So there's like 3 questions there.
Yeah. Well, I joined Unchained because I, at some point, started looking exclusively to work for a Bitcoin company, which I'm sure seems strange to non-Bitcoiners, but it was like I got really into this technology when I was down in Mexico, and I was talking to everybody about it. I was talking to my Spanish tutor
Dude, I
about
couldn't
it.
stop either.
I alienating dates about it all the time. Sometimes the dates were not alienated, which was very exciting. And
Yeah.
pitching Bitcoin in Spanish is like one of the great achievements of my life. But I just needed to talk to people about it who weren't like, putting up with me,
Mm.
but who like met the other side of the conversation and were enthusiastic. And I went to the Bitcoin 2020, I think it was 2020
Yep.
conference in Miami,
Oh, okay.
which was just like this bizarre rager where like suddenly no one's wearing a mask and like everyone got COVID and I got COVID. And yeah, so I wanted to join a Bitcoin company. I tried briefly. I worked for like 2 or 3 months for maybe less than that, part time for a crypto company, which I thought I'd like get some exposure to. And I I found myself essentially rooting against it.
Mm.
Also interviewing for other companies for a variety of reasons, and also just thinking it would die. So I was like, that's not really what I want to do. What I really want to do is work with people who I like see eye to eye on this technology about something I find enormously important. And so I interviewed for a number of Bitcoin companies that appealed to me a lot, and ended up choosing Unchained for a variety of reasons. One of them is it's in Austin. I wanted to like physically be with people.
Mhm.
Like Strike, for instance, is an international workforce entirely. Um, and I really missed working in an office, which I'm not doing right now all that often. And, just like, having colleagues in person.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think Unchained is extremely important, something like Unchained in the ecosystem, which is, um, people who aren't that familiar with cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin in particular, I don't think really understand or like feel the impact of self custody, which is this is not just a digital commodity, but like essentially the only thing that we have that you can own absolutely and uh, unilaterally and send without permission. So you can imagine like you have your house and you think you own your house, you own it, but like your ownership is contingent upon the government, right? Like your property right is recorded by the government and, eminent domain literally like can be taken by the government. Many things are taken non-legally, right? Like things can be pretty easily stolen. And at any rate, if you own gold, let's say, and you had it in a safe, which I was thinking about doing when the war with Russia and Ukraine broke out, uh, you start to realize the limitations of this,
Mm.
which are, your flimsy security in your house if you were to like trade it in for something, like at a bank or one of these gold ETFs or like, Birch Gold, something like that. You're holding an IOU for something. We're used to this because this is every asset that we have in the world.
Even your bank too. Your
Your
bank,
bank can
the money in your bank is technically an IOU. Everybody considers it theirs because they earned it, but you
Yeah,
do have to ask permission for the bank to.
and it is denied.
It
Like
can be very
it
much
can be
denied.
denied. I've had for not like sinister reasons, uh, there was like some sort of identity question or something like that, or I ordered a new debit card and it didn't reach me, and so I had to cancel. And periods of 2 to 3 weeks where that IOU is just not redeemable.
Mm.
That's fine for me. For some people, it's not. And at any rate, it draws home this notion that like you hold a claim on something that someone else owns,
Yeah.
and that claim can be denied. And that is our universe. That's like everything,
Yeah.
except these cryptocurrencies.
Mhm.
And really, in particular, uniquely Bitcoin, when you get to like the absoluteness of that ownership. that if you have this seed phrase, if you have these sort of like 12 words that basically compute a random number that is the private key that gives you access to the lockbox with your funds, you own that. You own it. Like no one can take it away from you. And
You could essentially store those words in your head, and you
yep.
could deprecate every physical evidence of those words, right?
Hmm.
So you could cross. There's actual people that have crossed borders from maybe a communist regime or a totalitarian regime.
Hmm.
They have
Left
nothing.
San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah. But like leaving maybe, yeah, some country and coming to America, and there's clearly, nothing on you, right? But you can remember those 12 words, go back, get a device like a Bitcoin
Yeah.
signing device, right? Import that seed phrase in there, and you have the private key, which is a little
Yeah.
bit more complex and involves cryptography. But that's the beauty of it too, is like
Yeah.
you don't need anything unless
I was just thinking of that scene from Zoolander where they try to like get information from the computer because there's a common misconception that like your hardware wallet or your signing device, there's a lot of like just tons of debate at
yeah,
Unchained about what we should call these things,
yeah.
but that like holds the money, and it doesn't. It's a thing for computing, like a thin layer of software that helps you like compute a number from a set of words essentially,
Mhm.
and then broadcast transactions, sign them and broadcast them
Yeah.
to the network. Usually it's like air gapped; it doesn't touch the internet.
Yeah.
And you may save your keys on there for a while, but it's not, your money isn't on there.
Mhm.
Your money is associated with this infinitely large number,
Mhm.
like close to the number of atoms in the universe, and that large number produces another large number that's the address. And it's just like if you have the number A, you can unlock number B, and that's it.
Mhm.
It's wild. It's such a strange concept.
Yeah.
And at any rate, that is extraordinarily powerful, and it's absolutely fucking terrifying because if you lose that number, if you have like $10 million in that number and you lose that number or you forget one of those 12 words, it's gone.
Mhm.
There is no recovery process. You can't go to like the Bureau of Bitcoin and like ask for a backup and like prove your identification.
Mhm.
It's gone. You have absolute ownership and absolute responsibility. And so this problem of how you handle that tremendous novel gift, which is extraordinarily powerful, is a very fundamental problem. And I believe what sort of Unchained's core service, which is we refer to as collaborative custody,
Mhm.
is probably the best solution for almost everybody.
Mhm.
And what that is it leverages Bitcoin's native multi-signature capacity, which is to say you can create an address or, like a public, an address. You could think of it as a lockbox in which you put your money. And that lockbox is essentially like this transparent thing. Everyone can see where the money is, but they can't access it unless they have 2 out of the 3 or 3 out of the 4. You can come up with some multi-signature setup of the keys that are required by the script that encumbers this money in order to access it. And so that's multi-signature. So you have 3 keys, you need any 2 of them to open it. And that's already better than having one that you can forget. And you
Mhm.
can sort of distribute records of these in various places if you want, or secure them in a variety of ways.
Just a real quick,
Mhm.
a great example that I personally witnessed and spoke to a client about with our colleague Tyler Campbell. This client had a business partner. They had their own vault, right? So they had they had 2 of 3 keys, 2 of those keys being theirs, and the third one being Unchained. And they had an actual physical vault in their house, right?
Mhm.
And that physical vault stored the signing device and the seed phrase pertaining to the
Mhm.
signing device. So the total of 4 elements. They had the 2 elements,
Co-located.
yeah, co-located, stolen. Um, if that was a single sig setup, all their Bitcoin's gone, right? But
Mhm.
what they were able to do is contact their business partner. We created a new vault.
Mhm.
Um, they signed with the key that they still maintain with the other business partner. Unchained stepped in, signed, swept the funds into a new vault, shipped them a new device, right?
Mhm.
Whereas, yeah, if you were just using a ledger and you only had the Bitcoin on that, you know,
Mhm.
this that was a single sig approach, you're fucked. All of your Bitcoin's gone.
Yep.
And yeah, so anyways, I just want to provide that anecdotal
Well, that's helpful.
anecdote.
That's basically the difference. You described the difference between multi-sig and the collaborative custody model that is
Mm,
Unchained,
yeah,
right? Where you could do your own multi-sig, and if you lose one in one vault, then you have 2 other keys, and you still
yeah.
get to it. Um,
Do that with Nunchuck, I think, right now.
But there's a lot of technical complexity involved in, say, then the question, how the hell do you move all your funds that were associated with these two keys to another setup that no longer uses this key that was just stolen?
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want it. You don't want them to be able to see where the money is, ideally. You certainly don't want them to be able to steal it if they get one more key. So you need to do what we call at Unchained, I think it's internal language, like a sweeping of all the
Yep.
funds
Yep.
in your vault. Um, there's just a lot of complexity involved in this problem. And so what Unchained does is they offer to be one of the three keys in a setup. That's our most typical vault setup. And what that means is that you have two keys, but you can always rely on Unchained to have another. So let's say you're traveling. You can travel with one hardware device. And I mean, this is a use case that I think would be particularly useful for me because most of my Bitcoin, which I don't have, I lost it all years ago, is distributed amongst like keys in different geographies.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't spend most of it right now. Like if some emergency came up, I've orchestrated this such that like I'm not able to easily spend it. So it's more secure. But with Unchained, I could travel with a key, and if something came up, I could get in touch with them and I could prove my identity. Um, a complicated thing in the modern day,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can collaboratively spend the funds because together we have two keys. But Unchained, if everyone at our company wanted to steal your money and you stored it with us, we couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
There's like we couldn't get together and do it because we have set it up in such a way that we do not have sufficient, the sufficient keys to sign the function
Mm-hmm.
to prove cryptographic ownership in a way that the validators on the Bitcoin network would accept.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of this utility that derives from having Unchained be part of it. We can help you sweep. We can help you rekey. We can like help onboard you and teach you how to do these things that remain and will remain somewhat complicated and walk you through the complexity involved, but you retain absolute ownership.
Mm.
And that balance, I think, is really the best balance.
And in comparison to like Coinbase.
Yeah. Which you have, I think the right wording for this is you have an account with Coinbase. You don't, we talk about custodial or non-custodial ownership. I find that term very confusing.
Well, you could say like
Yeah.
Bitcoin IOU versus actually
Right.
owning your Bitcoin.
You own it or you have an account with a company that owns it. And the company that owns it can then, misspend it. I mean, this just happened with
It's so many over the course of the past year. BlockFi,
Prime Trust recently.
Celsius.
Yeah.
Um,
There was Mt. Gox was the big one years and years ago.
yeah.
FTX, obviously.
Yeah.
They they just like, you've given your money to these people who just don't know how to handle it or don't care to handle it.
And there's no,
appropriately.
like you said, there's no bureau of Bitcoin. Like
Yeah.
once that all of the downfall of FTX and Celsius and all that, you're not getting anything back. You're probably not going to get any insurance or
Mhm.
something redeemable from the bankruptcy process.
Yeah.
Is my guess, right?
Well, in order to do it, they would have to. I mean, the thing, you can't print more Bitcoin to make
Right.
these people whole.
Right.
So you basically maybe they can print or extract by taxes from other people, which I hope they would not do, money like dollars that would pay for more Bitcoin to make these people whole.
Mm.
But it's
Yeah.
it cannot be done. So yeah, I think it's a hugely important service to figure out, and we do a really, I think, a excellent job of it.
Yeah.
And the sort of founding, a lot of very smart people who I'm just like so blown away by how smart and committed, most of the team is to this.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's one hell of a team, man.
it's
It's
very
one hell of a
impressive.
company right now, and still technically a startup, right? So we're trying to mature, and it's I feel truly lucky to be a part of the team. I did not feel qualified to be part of the startup when I joined, and that was back in 2021.
Mhm.
And I was just so blown away when I was accepted and honored. And yeah, every day that I work for the company, it's just it's a privilege, you know. And there's not really anybody building the infrastructure. Like there's people that like Nunchuck or Casa and other people that are
Mhm.
making somewhat of a similar product, right? But there's no
Mhm.
one really doing anything that we're doing. Like we're building a financial services, uh, call it software platform
Mhm.
that leverages the network and providing you with like, a top tier team that has expertise in some of the complexities, the technical complexities. Our technical concierge team, they've been doing this for a while now, and so yeah, it's truly an amazing company to work for, and I think you definitely described it pretty eloquently. What is your future for like the Bitcoin Commons and the Bitcoin culture here in Austin? What do you foresee, or at least hope to see?
I mean, I do think a lot of the energy around this space is like defined by a core contingent that's completely obsessed and will just like focus on it endlessly.
Hmm.
And that's sort of you go to Bit Devs in Austin on like, it's one Thursday every month, and you'll see just like this impossibly over your head technical dialogue about all of the progress that's being made and like all of the thousand fronts associated with this technology.
Hmm.
And usually, just to clarify, that's not some portion of that, usually small, is debates around changes to the underlying technology. And a majority of it is like building an ecosystem around a technology that many people believe is like largely or close to sufficient as a base layer for the future of money.
Mm.
Um, but then a lot of the technology is like, or sorry, not the technology, a lot of the interest is more curiosity oriented. And that waxes and wanes in correlation to the trajectory of the price. So, I mean, I think when to some degree we've entered this sort of like stable builders environment,
Mm.
for the last like year or so that I've been here, where this core group of obsessives is just like plugging away at their shit. And if, when, I suspect somewhat soon, there's another slow or rapid increase in price, you're going to see like another sort of like explosion of interest in the technology that, is exciting and kind of terrifying because there's basically it grows. It's a classic anti-fragile technology. It basically grows in response to like threats, and threats can be purposeful or they can be like, oh my God, like a million people just got on the Lightning Network, or like there's all this excitement about ordinals, which, was a whole weird little corner debate in Bitcoin for a week. Um, and that pushes up fee rates that then make it harder to cause errors with forced closing of Lightning channels. None of this has to make sense to anyone listening. And essentially, any sharp, drastic change in the network exposes its weaknesses, and then the sort of organism. I mean, if you want to hear obsession, this is the way I sort of think about
Yeah.
Bitcoin is like this little plant that like some person, group of people, alien, uh, planted, like, in, is it 20
2000, technically the network. Yeah. So the white paper was 2008. Networks. Uh, Genesis block 2009.
yeah, so he or she or, whoever,
Alien.
alien,
I like that one better.
sends a message out to like this, the word CryptoKitties, you remember CryptoKitties?
Yeah.
They came to my mind. But sends a message out to this, cyberpunk mailing list, explains via white paper, like his or her, it's the, what it,
Hmm. Hmm.
aliens thinking about this topic, and then starts mining and showing people how to mine, and like releases this organism into the world that structures around itself. It's an organism, and it structures around itself a set of incentives that have encouraged for now north of like 12, 13 years other people to get in and help it grow, and to clear obstacles out of its way, and to become invested, often in like a monetary level, in its well-being. And so there's this thing. I remember, I think I had a dream about this. It may have been like after some, I don't know, but it's really strange when you think about it. But I think that that's basically what it is. It's it's composed of it's this organism composed of all this human activity,
Hmm.
and probably increasing in the future, like cybernetic activity. That's not the right word, but like AIs, et cetera, trying to like exchange value with
Mm.
one another, pay for compute services, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's this organism composed of so many other things that like continues to grow and get more robust as it solves the problems of the people who are invested in it, who become more invested in it as it becomes more robust. and it just grows and grows and grows, and no one's in charge of it, and all these people are like tending to it and like pruning the
Yeah.
weeds around it, and it's really strange,
Yeah.
and it's really wonderful. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that goes in like it ebbs and flows. It goes in
Yeah.
waves, and people accuse cryptocurrency broadly, and certainly the Bitcoin space in particular, of being like very focused on this number go up technology,
Mhm.
and I think over the last year and a half, I haven't tracked it too closely, but I'd say generally the number hasn't gone up that much, and there the reason that matters, among other things, like we own, or I used to own some Bitcoin, is that it provokes, it makes it more secure the more money is in it, and it provokes more interest. You get more people working on it, more people using it. It becomes a more robust and useful technology for people as the price goes up, and so it's a metric of concern. But there's also this niceness about having long periods of time where, in response to previous threats, you get to fix it in preparation for new ones. You get to improve the experience
Yeah.
for new people who are likely to be like, "What the hell is this? I need to get in,
Mm.
in a year or whatever."
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that was very well said. And I do think Austin's trajectory, you've got
Mhm.
New York City as the finance capital of the world, right? And it'd be interesting to see Austin becoming the Bitcoin capital of the world, like Parker tends to you know, um, verbalize. But something that I wanted to ask you, for anybody that's like a part of the Squatch community and not really immersed into Bitcoin, why is it important for the average individual to save in Bitcoin? Because a lot of people, you know, they can't wrap, or maybe they have the wrong mental model or conception of, well, it's a very expensive investment and I just can't spend that much. It's like, well,
Right.
there's so many people here that spend money on their health all the
Yeah.
time and they spend on
Don't do
products.
that.
Yeah, never. Just fuck your health. Uh, but I think that, you know, when we change the framework, the mental framework of why it's so important to save in Bitcoin, the average individual here training at Squatch or anywhere that's not really in the Bitcoin hub, um, I think, their minds can kind of be blown by, when that framework changes, and that it takes a lot because you have to understand our current monetary system, which I really enjoyed your article, which we can get to.
Yeah.
Your Substack writing was very well um, orchestrated, written. Um, but I would just like to hear if you were, yeah, if you were just talking to someone, which I'm sure you already have, that has really no plan on investing in Bitcoin anytime soon, or even
Mhm.
I just say saving. I save
Yeah.
it. I save in Bitcoin. Or I used to save in Bitcoin. Uh, would love to hear how you would describe that or explain it.
Yeah. Well, so, like I sort of alluded to a minute ago, there's this weird thing with Bitcoin where, it causes alignment, and in some cases, there's an alignment, uh, alignment of incentives. There's an alignment or association between the reasons that we believe this is an important technology that ought to exist and would make the world better, and the reasons that you should invest in it. They're actually quite overlapping, which is, again, strange. Um, and I'd start with that, which is, basically, and there's a joke about this. There was a Silicon Valley clip years ago where, like, someone was asked about cryptocurrency or something, and, like, whips out a whiteboard and, like, writes, like, "What is money?" Something like that. But it's like, money is this extraordinarily, we don't tend to think about it day to day, but money, the nature of money, first of all, money is a, like, timeless human technology. It is at least older than the written word, which we know because the first written records are of monetary transactions.
Mm,
Um, and it forms the foundation of society, of human societies of any complexity and scale. And, like, the reason we have monetary records going back to the beginning of civilization, almost certainly because you cannot have civilization without money. And what it is essentially the codification or the transformation of human labor or human time, basically the same thing, into a universal language of value, of what people value. And that enables the cooperation of society at scale and forms the foundation of, like, a world in which we can all cooperate to build the things that we want together, to like produce worlds of value to one another. And a flawed money or a debased money is like erodes at this foundation of society. So if you have a monetary system in which a few people can create out of nothing what other people sweat and spend their lives on, you have a system of like functional servitude. That and we would argue that is to a great degree the system we live in now. And you don't tend to think of it, but when you're working for dollars, much worse the case if you're working for like a bolivar in Venezuela or a lira or whatever else. You're working for something that other people are in a position to make a decision to like destroy the value of, and you are spending your life on that thing. You have limited time on this planet, and you are spending it for something that other people can inflate away. So obviously, this causes inflation. Of course, I mean, there are debates around this, but like if you double the number of monetary units in circulation, you are doubling the amount of money pursuing, all things held equal, the same number of goods or items in an economy, things produced of value to people. But it also causes it causes inequality. So the way the money surfaces in the system for the servitude point is not equal, and it's not related to fair things like work or creation of value for others. It's fundamentally arbitrary, and it's often related to graft. And then you're really undermining the sort of like moral and societal foundations of a broader society, which should relate value accrued to value created for other people, and should ideally allow people to sort of save and make long-term decisions about what they want the work they put into the world to net them, across time and across space. And I mean, like in an argument that I used to find ludicrous, but I now found just correct. I mean, you enable the prolonging of war. You are centralizing decision-making power and control amongst a group of people who have not earned it. They haven't done anything for it. They haven't, built and given things to other people so that those other people pay them with like, the sweat of their brow. And, we who are into Bitcoin generally because we believe that this is a huge problem that no one thinks about. There are a lot of reasons we don't think about it, but that this is the only plausible solution to this problem for a variety of reasons, and that solving this problem will drastically improve our ability to cooperate at scale to create a better world. And on an individual investment level, you just think of the servitude thing. It's you can work for something that you have no ability to predict at all. A minute from now, first of all, you don't know how many units of this thing there are now. Nobody in the world has any idea. Not to mention
of the United States dollars.
Yeah, has any idea how many dollars there are in circulation. They can't even land on a definition of what a dollar is. We know how many like base monetary units, let's say like treasuries, physical dollars, et cetera, exist. But on top of that, there's like all of this like complex house of cards, and most of the money in circulation is just like credit, like apparated into the world by banks. And we have no idea how many dollars exist now. We have no idea how many dollars will exist a year from now. It fluctuates wildly. The rate at which they're increasing is rapidly on the increase if you look over the last decade or so. And you are exchanging your time on this planet for an asset that is highly unstable in terms of its basic issuance and can be inflated away, like doubled at will, and is. And it's worse in other countries. And those other countries are basically like, as Saifedean puts it, like their currencies are like the US dollar plus like country risk. It's worse for other people. We are like the most stable fiat currency in the world. But that's not saying much. And what Bitcoin gives you absolute assurances, I can tell you to like a fractional degree within 10 years, 2 hours, exactly how many Bitcoin there will be. There's nothing in the world that has that assurances. Gold doesn't, Ethereum certainly doesn't, US dollar doesn't. And that's massive. And the price of Bitcoin fluctuates over time in relation to like a whole bunch of macroeconomic and social factors and uncertainties. But at the end of the day, as more and more people understand this value proposition among many others, the bet is that that predictability, the fact that you are trading your time for something constant, that you remains like a constant share essentially of the future economic pie. Um, and you can trade it to whom you want without censorship, without limitation. Uh, these value propositions mean, we think, somewhat inexorably, that there's at least a very high likelihood that this will become the dominant best. It is the best money. It is the thing that enables people to best make calculations across time and space, to coordinate their activities as well as possible, to fairly and voluntarily interact with one another, and that those things are of high enough value, particularly in a world where those things are becoming less reliable in fiat currencies. And I think the future is going to be much worse from that perspective, that it's a much better thing to trade your time for than this thing that the value of which rests on the like full faith and credit of the United States, which is really, I think, slowly and then rapidly undermining that full faith and credit. And it's unsustainable. It's a circular dependency on itself, the
Mm.
the U.S. dollar system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for that description. And one of the other most common misconceptions for people that are maybe our age or a little bit younger here at Squatch, and then I can maybe ask another question about people that are older with retirement funds. The misconception that's very prominent and heavily circulating is other cryptocurrencies.
Hmm.
You said Ethereum, you can't verify that fractional supply. Um, Curious as to how you can maybe, as simply as you can, let or describe to people what you're doing when you're taking that risk by investing the money that you're saving in dollars to Ethereum or Dogecoin. The most prevalent ones, aside from Bitcoin, seem to be like, yeah, Ethereum,
Hmm.
Solana. And why is it a risk, and why is Bitcoin um, a more secure investment or
Yeah,
savings?
I'm gonna do a worse job of this, but basically, there are a bunch of buzz phrases associated with,
Blockchain.
yeah, blockchain technology. So if you sprinkle a little blockchain technology on something, it becomes uncontrollable, right? Like it is inviolable. It is quote unquote decentralized, and that means you can just trust it absolutely. And that ties into like the basic premise of Bitcoin is to some degree that if you decentralize, you're trying to gain inviolability by decentralizing control over the thing. There's no one person who has control over the issuance of Bitcoin. It's distributed among like many tens of thousands of actors around the globe. Um, in order to achieve that, Bitcoin had to make a whole bunch of sacrifices. It had to trade off against infinite complexity of computing capacity, right? Like Turing complete smart contracts on Bitcoin. It had to trade off against the number of transactions that can go through on its blockchain per unit of time, uh, basically. And what has happened with most, another thing to note, which I think people don't realize, is like Bitcoin wasn't the first. This isn't like, like I don't know that MySpace was the first, but it was this very, Bitcoin is the culmination of like decades of evolution and attempts to create a digital money. It's like the first one that really worked. It got a balance right, in which the incentives are all correct to enable like a, a small enough size of transaction, and to have low bandwidth requirements and low storage requirements for running a node in which you can validate all the transactions along it. This is like reasonably technical.
Mhm.
And for instance, when you look at something like Ethereum, its general heaviness as a protocol, the fact that it enables arbitrary smart contracting capacity, and as far as I know, it has no cap to block size other than what you're willing to pay for with the currency itself, means that the bandwidth and storage requirements for, and this is just one specific complaint, but just to make the point generally, the bandwidth and storage requirements for running a full quote unquote archival Ethereum node are very significant and are growing faster than the improvement in storage and bandwidth, like in our computing systems. And so what this means is it is a centralizing tendency that is baked into the technology, so that already and over time, you will have fewer and fewer people who are able to pay for the computers and the networking requirements to run a full archival Ethereum node, which is necessary because the order of transactions in a ledger determines ownership. And when that happens, when you have like a very small number of Ethereum nodes run on, basically, I think most of them are run by this company Infura, which also runs MetaMask. Most of them are hosted on AWS software. You end up in a scenario where this thing is quote unquote decentralized, but it is like more or less run by its like God King Vitalik Buterin. That was dismissive and mean, but he's like the sort of the head of Ethereum. His word is
Mhm.
so far not been pushed back on. He's had uh, essentially unilateral ability to control the direction of this technology for now, like how many years? Like 8, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and if the government were to put a gun to his head or just like pressure him politely, he could change the trajectory of the technology. If someone were to go to the CEO of Infura, I don't know who that is, and do the same, they could change the trajectory of the technology. If someone were to like politely ask Jeff Bezos, hey, can you shut off these servers?
Mm.
You would end up with a scenario where the entirety, like almost the entirety of Ethereum, the archive of the ledger of transactions is shut down in an instant. And notably in Ethereum, and this gets more complicated, but because it's a proof of stake system, you don't have embedded within each block in the blockchain proof of work gone into writing that block. And what that means is you can, with essentially no computing effort, generate a fake blockchain of sufficient length. And at a time where like agreed upon consensus around the history of the network is put into disarray or uncertainty, uh, anyone could throw up an alternative and you fall back on social consensus. And social consensus is not consensus. That's like war. And there's tremendous pressure around it. And if someone were to shut down Infura or ask AWS to shut it down or get Vitalik on their side, it's done. I mean, like the centralizing tendencies have it is decentralized in name only. It is
Yeah.
there's some reasonable pushback, but there are a huge number of centralizing for. There have been trade-offs made with all of these technologies to enable centralized control or fancy whiz-bang activity that makes it unstable as a monetary layer. So does that mean in the next like 3 years it's not a good bet? It does not mean that. It could be a good bet. What it does mean is that in a world, which I think is the world we live in which like governments want to retain control of, or banks want to retain control of money making because it is their most powerful tool. These things will be their enemies and will eventually, pressure will be put upon them to be shut down. And in that world, these things clearly cannot withstand that pressure. So for any long period of time, I think they are either a bad bet or a bet on a technology that does not fulfill any of the promises that at least you and I care about.
You could
Yeah.
argue currently too that the SEC or IRS, because the SEC has been going after tons.
Yeah.
Just the other day, I think yesterday, I saw a headline: SEC or I think it was the IRS. They're requesting a bunch of documentation history from Kraken, and yeah, a lot of the SEC has been cracking down
Nice.
on on other cryptocurrency exchanges and different cryptos being defined as a security, whereas Bitcoin is still, from the regulatory perspective and the ivory towers of these agencies or institutions, it's still a commodity in their perspective. And they're also, I believe, the first spot ETF, Bitcoin spot ETF, was approved, and it was BlackRock that submitted it, which is annoying, that they just kind of dismissed all these different attempts. And the wealthiest, I would argue, I think the wealthiest firm in the world gets an approval for something, which just, is annoying. But so I would argue that, just to comment on your last bit there, that those risks of governments coming after these different crypto technologies is already occurring. And
I'd say that there's both. It's both of them. So some people have accused, I think Nick Carter brought this up on Twitter. He's like a Bitcoiner who's gotten very frustrated with the Bitcoin community, which is a reasonable guy. I like him. I don't know, but he seems nice.
Death to the Bitcoin maxis.
Yeah. I was gonna say fuck that guy. No, but he's pointed out that there's something like kind of I haven't seen that much of it, but there's like some contingent that's sort of like gleeful about SEC action
Mm.
against these other cryptocurrencies.
Is
And
this
I
Operation Choke Point that
yeah,
he talks about?
yeah,
Uh,
well, and recent
okay,
stuff,
okay.
there's definitely been a pressure on banking institutions not to work with
Mm,
cryptocurrency so much. And I think what we're saying, or at least like the version of what we're saying that I like is there's like an actual distinction to be made between something that no one owns and something that a small group of people own and can print into being, um, control the issuance of. And the latter is like very easily falls into what U.S. regulatory agencies would refer to as securities. And you pass the Howey test. I don't know that much about
yeah,
the Howey test.
yeah.
And the former is like akin to a commodity like, lumber or gold.
Mhm,
And that's at least regulatorily a meaningful distinction, as well as philosophically a pretty meaningful distinction, though of course it's a spectrum. And Bitcoin's being the latter, Bitcoin's being essentially a commodity because no one controls its issuance, and there is no Bitcoin Incorporated. Uh, Both means that it's less likely in the short term future to well, it means that it's less likely in the short term future to get this sort of attention from government. But I also think it's very important to state that when slash if it does, it is a much, much, much more robust technology to
mhm,
try to limit, take down, or co-opt.
mhm,
Um, that's not to say it's a surefire thing. I mean, I think this guy Eric Voskuil wrote a really interesting book
mm.
that we read recently with John Barrios,
Crypto,
Crypto
yep.
Economics, and sort of his first principle of the book is essentially that it is a open question and an insolvable open question. Like you can't prove it mathematically one way or another whether a cryptocurrency can resist like a prolonged state attack, which a little I think is likely to happen at some point. Um, but it's certainly not shut in the case against Bitcoin. This is the most plausible solution to this fundamental problem of the co-option of money. And it's the community, the people who created it, everyone involved with it pretty much has made every decision to try to maximize the likelihood of it surviving.
Mm,
And it's just not the case. I mean, Solana you brought up is like they literally will like shut it down for a day.
yeah,
You can't,
yeah.
you just can't. It's not centralized. It's a joke. It's a VC pump and dump scheme. And that's the other thing, just to throw it literally north of 99% of cryptocurrencies,
Mm,
just because there are thousands of them,
yeah,
are just scams.
yeah.
And when we're toxic, which I used to call myself, but I feel like that doesn't appeal to people. Um, yeah, it's because a lot of people just get reamed by these scams.
Mhm,
Like it's not good.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, just one example that comes to mind is, it was like Elon is the greatest or the GOAT,
yeah,
coin,
uh-huh,
and on Fox News, I think it was John Vallis who actually tweeted this. He tweeted the video, and it was these 2 guys that, were remarking on this new crypto coin that Elon is the GOAT, and which is such a ridiculous, crypto token name, but, yeah, they were like, "Yeah, we have friends and their grandparents investing into this," and it was just so when you know what's going on behind the scenes with all these different cryptocurrencies, it's just, it's heartbreaking to even hear that. It's like grandparents, their entire retirement, savings is, going into, uh, essentially a scam.
yeah.
Um,
When you think about so one of the reasons there was this big like crypto boom or just like general this like sort of retail investment is that as inflation occurs, and I'm one of the people who believes that the CPI is generally sort of understating inflation,
mhm,
both for like really straightforward above board reasons, which is, like
yeah,
food and housing are basically not calculated in it.
mhm,
But also, whatever. Um, Inflation is occurring. Inflation always occurs. It's worse than usual. And in a particularly inflationary environment, people seek somewhere they can store their wealth, like
mhm,
the fruit of their labor,
mhm,
in a way that will last some period of time. And when lots of people are doing that for the same reason, because they don't have, um, their money can't store their value. Their money is bleeding value over time. They seek investments, and like each marginal investment is more speculative. Like basically, in the same way that each in your life, marginal utility, you first spend your dollars on the things most necessary for your survival. As you get more and more money, you spend it like less and less valuably.
Mm,
Um, in the case of investment, I mean, people are spending. They've just got a bunch of money on their hand. They just got like the money from the COVID relief bill or whatever. They don't know what to do with it. Um, they they spend it on increasingly speculative things, and that causes a bubble in these speculative things, and that makes these speculative things feel less speculative,
mm,
and people just pile the money into it, and then there's nothing there. It's like a team of people or bots to like talk about the community or ecosystem on Telegram, and like a flashy website and some venture money to prop that up, and then it shoots down in value like 100% in an hour, and these people are just monetarily ruined. And it is a bummer that sort of the technology Bitcoin that was like purpose built to try to provide a useful alternative to this sort of monetary system, then you know has all these copycats that are like, you know, we consider in some ways the monetary system a confidence game or like a pyramid scheme.
mm,
Um, the value of the U.S. dollar is dependent on trust in the value of the U.S. dollar, or really the U.S. Treasury or the U.S.'s ability to pay back its debts, which increase exponentially, and we're heading towards some sort of problem. And so Bitcoiners feel like, oh man, this is a bit of a Ponzi scheme. We can create a technology or like usher in or support a technology that makes it impossible to create these sort of Ponzi schemes. And then there are a bunch of people who are like, oh shit, I can create a Ponzi scheme with this. Like, let's do it. And people are just ruined. And it's like, it's very, yeah, it's depressing.
so just to, uh, um, yeah, just for a concluding question for you, just 'cause we're running low on time. How does the, construction, like the form of money as a technology, alter human behavior? So for instance, proof of stake versus proof of work.
Hmm.
Um, I think a lot of people are so incentivized or they feel like it was very interesting to me that so many people were so hyped up about everything but Bitcoin. Maybe that's because Bitcoin's price was much higher than all these other cryptocurrencies, and people see the lower price within within maybe Ethereum, Solana, and all of that, and so they think that they can make the best bottom for their buck. And um, there in your article, and I wish we could go longer, but you talk about Illich. Uh,
Hmm.
and how he was a priest and he was constantly questioning the um, institutionalization of society, right?
Hmm.
Our education system and whatnot. Could you provide just maybe a brief explanation of how money, those various forms of money, can alter human behavior?
Yeah, well, I think the stability of your money over time is uh, it leads to there's a sort of Jordan Peterson point that he makes in some of I don't know how people feel about him, but he has this beautiful series of lectures on the Bible, and he's talking about the Cain and Abel story and how it signifies or relates to the idea of saving value over time, and the sort of like codification and narrative format of the value of giving a sacrifice, which is essentially what saving is for the future. Um, and how this story is boiling that down into a narrative format that if you sacrifice for the future, you should be rewarded, or you will be rewarded by reality. And also in that story, like envy about that process and about the sort of arbitrariness and unfairness of reality. But when you change the ability of people to do that, when you make it harder for people to sacrifice for the future, to save up, to make long run decisions, and when you essentially encourage them, in hyperinflating economies, they're famous for people would get their paycheck and run right to the grocery store because like the goods will retain their value more than the money. In the really hyperinflating economies, like in Weimar Germany, people are using their money as kindling. Um, I've seen like was it $1 trillion, $100 billion Zimbabwean dollars?
Mm,
Had a Zimbabwean friend in college who threw a party where that was like our monopoly money. It was like really depressing. Um, in that sort of context, you can't plan for the future. You are disincentivized to plan for the future. You're also incentivized to go into debt, and that has deranging effects on the individual and on the society at large.
Mm,
It makes us less forward looking. It makes us less, um, invested in building because the costs, the effort we put into building is not rewarded. And there, certainly, I mean, if anyone's interested by this argument, check out the Bitcoin Standard and the Fiat Standard. Probably the
mm,
latter by Saifedean Ammous gets into this at length. But there's a deep foundational relationship between money and like thinking about the future and creation of value and building of societies and the moral underpinnings of society. And when that when that underlying technology is not trustworthy or valuable or is like arbitrary and unpredictable in its value over time, it has effects on people's behavior.
mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well said. Um, so being a Bitcoiner, I know you're maybe uh, less apparent on the internet, but I typically invite the guests to um, state where they can find you, and whether that's like Instagram or Twitter or your own website. I don't know if you have anything, but I really liked your Substack. So I don't know if you want to recommend that, but it's up to you what you want to shout out,
sure.
or you can go anonymous because I know there's a lot of Bitcoins that value privacy. So
Yeah, it's too late. Yeah, my name is Sasha. I'm on Instagram as Sasha F Klein, which is Klein. Um, I'm on Twitter, but I just lurk.
hmm
I mostly lurk on Instagram.
yeah.
Yeah, the Substack. I mean, I haven't written very much. I wrote like one or two pieces. I took a bunch of really interesting courses on like philosophy and stuff when I was in Mexico, and I wrote some things in relation to that. And that is out of my element.substack.com. But it's really like, two things.
Yeah.
I just gave up on it. Sometime before I die, I am hoping to publish a whole series that I outlined with some friends on like science and scientism and the manner in which we confuse the two and have converted like authorities around science into basically religious authorities.
Mm.
Um, but that is not there, so don't go
Yeah.
looking for it. Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I really liked your Substack writing, and I wish we could dive into it. I think we got some people waiting
Yeah.
to use the studio, and but I definitely hope you continue to write on that Substack. It's up to you, obviously, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on, man. This was it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
So much fun.
yeah, man.
Really appreciate it.
Later, guys. Peace.